Lakeland Currents is sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service offers tax preparation for individuals and businesses across from City Hall in Nisswa and on the web at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents, where tonight we're talking about, I think, a very interesting topic for central Minnesota. It's a household survey of second homeowners in 8 counties in central and west central Minnesota. I think we often wonder, who are all these people that have cabins on the lakes, and where do they come from, and what are they doing, and how much money are they spending in our areas? Well, tonight we're going to talk with an expert on this topic, Merritt Bussiere. And Merritt is with the University of Minnesota Extension, and he's been doing some pretty interesting work, his team has. And welcome to the show, Merritt.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And maybe we could maybe review a little bit about your organization, what you're doing, where you're located.
And I'm based here in Brainerd in one of Extension's regional offices, part of the Community Economics program. We focus on applied research related to economic development, which hopefully helps our local county and regional partners make better decisions. And we too were intrigued by this group of part-time residents, important part-time residents in these rural counties and these recreation counties, and that kind of drove our research. So I'm one of 8 regional researchers with Community Economics. We have others around the state. I'm based in Brainerd, where we have other programs as well. There's water quality management specialists, youth development specialists. So we have all sorts of people in that office that are there to make our communities better places. That's what we're working on.
I am a native of the area, and I guess I've lived through this humongous change in, I'll say just the central Minnesota area, but the Brainerd Lakes area. When I was a kid, there were more people that went to resorts probably than there were that actually owned their own cabins. I mean, there have been cabin owners, obviously, since the 40s and the 50s, I think. But in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, then we just started seeing value of land going up and the property that resorts were on. It became harder and harder for mom and pop resort owners to make a living. And there's a lot more selling off and a lot more people purchasing cabins. So there's been a tremendous growth in this particular area. And I was going to throw this in because I do some work with the World Future Society.
Sure.
And one of the things they're saying that's going to happen in the next decade is there's going to be fewer and fewer people who want to own things. Cars, music things, houses. There are going to be more people who are going to be happy renting them. And I'm just wondering, that's something for you to think about down the future. Is that going to
might be a trend that affects the second home and second home owners. Yeah.
So what are the 8 counties basically you're looking at here in your study?
So we looked at 4 in central Minnesota and 4 counties in west central. The ones we looked at include Aiken, Crow Wing, Cass, and Hubbard. And then over to the west, Otter Tail, Douglas, Pope. Oh, and there's one more, which I'm not thinking of. I'm kind of new to Minnesota.
Otter Tail?
Otter Tail's in there, yep. But basically, you know, we had an interest in this. The federal government classifies homes that are, quote, vacant for seasonal, occasional, and recreational use. And, you know, you look at some of these counties, these 8 counties, and in Aiken County, for instance, 50% of the housing units are seasonal.
50%?
50%, and much lower in some of the other counties that we looked at, but still 20% and above.
That's a big percentage.
That's a big percentage. And, you know, who are these folks? And we got kind of excited, and we reached out to these local county and regional partners and said, what do you want to know from these people? And they threw all sorts of great questions at us. Who are they? Where are they? You know, what do they spend? Do they have business experience that they might someday, you know, bring to their second home community? So we put together a survey, surveyed, I think we sent out 1,200 questionnaires, got back about 560 some, so a response rate of about 49%, which is good. Respectable in the early 21st century. It gets harder and harder to get folks to engage. And we also had some early support as we put this together with some partners at the U of M Housing Studies program. And we just got back a lot of great and some of it very interesting information about these folks.
So When you, I don't know if you looked at, I didn't look at all the details of the survey, but does it seem like the significant portion of the respondents are Minnesotans?
Yes, a fair number of them come from the Twin Cities, but not all of them. You know, I started, and this is something that's not in this initial report, but we're going to get out there. I started just doing a zip code analysis of the primary address of the second homeowner, and they have some nice online software to do this. And you start populating the map, and these little dots are popping up in Europe, in the Middle East, back east in the United States. So we need to dive into that a little more carefully. We did not really focus on that in this first report, but very interesting, the diversity of location for primary residence for these folks.
I know I have spent a fair amount of time in the Leech Lake area, and I think when the internet became really popular, we started seeing a little more of an influx of people from the California area purchasing property on Leech Lake, because I think when they compared prices to their area to Minnesota, there was a huge discrepancy there. So I don't know if that was a big factor of the internet or not, but it seems that there are people coming from farther away. I would suspect that if you looked at the Detroit Lakes area, there's a lot of people from that Fargo-Moorhead area that come into that area.
And we've not analyzed the sort of the location of the primary residence versus the second home location very carefully. But we did ask them, one of the items on the survey was to say, help us rate, you second homeowners, the quality of these amenities and services, everything from snow removal to parks and trails, but the internet service received the lowest score. And out of all of those, probably about 15 items, we asked them to score, but they were at least happy with the quality of the internet service. It speaks to a lot of the efforts going on throughout central and west central Minnesota to get broadband service out to more. It creates a basis for another business, probably.
It seems to me that when I was younger, when I got out of high school, you could buy property a lot more reasonable, and then as it got more and more expensive, I think your survey shows that fewer and fewer younger people were able to afford to buy the cabins, and it probably gets even more difficult to keep cabins in families if the taxes get too high. So there's a lot of those that are sold. But what does your survey show about the age of most of these
So
owners?
This is an older group. 88% of all respondents are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so exactly kind of what you're describing. It's a well-educated group. I mean, if you compare them to the average Minnesotan, far more likely to have a bachelor's and or a master's degree, a graduate degree of some kind. Most of these people are employed, but a fair number are retired. And they're well off. This is their annual household income far exceeds the median household income for Minnesotans.
And you have the median household income for Minnesota is about $59,000.
About $59,000, and this is a group where close to 60% of the respondents are earning over $100,000 in terms of household income per year. So really a kind of a dramatic comparison. We do find, and this may relate to those income numbers, that over half, and this was a question our local partners wanted us to ask, over half of these folks have substantive business experience, either ownership, operations, or management. And of that group that responded positively to that question, fully a quarter were open to the idea of moving their business to their second home community at some point, or opening a branch, or potentially opening a new business. So these are folks that could bring some resources to some of these counties.
And that's where the internet service and some of those amenities are pretty critical, aren't they?
Pretty critical. So as a basis, I mean, that infrastructure is as important as roads and the telephone anymore. That's
if they
real
don't
stuff.
have that, there's going to be it's going to limit them probably being able to do that, isn't it?
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet.
Now, is this information? Well, I would think that this is information that the counties and the townships can use to help in their planning when they look at this kind of information. If they're going to decide if they're going to run some more cabling somewhere, or whatever.
I hope so. Yeah, and there's already pretty good focus, both at the county and the regional level, of folks working really hard to extend broadband out into the rural areas, to get really good internet service. And that's important for healthcare services and becoming more and more important for healthcare services, but also, for, as you mentioned, for business development. To support somebody, I mean, if a person could live on the lake and run their business and be a part of the local economy and contribute to that, that benefits the county and the community, but it also benefits that person, maybe creates a couple of jobs. So yeah, I mean, that's an important piece of infrastructure in the early 21st century.
You said Aiken County has about 50% of their housing is seasonal.
Correct.
What did you find to be the couple of the biggest counties in terms of population of secondhand? I say second.
Well, those would be, I mean, that was one, and I believe Otter Tail came in second on that.
Really?
I don't have the details in front of me. One of the other counties was maybe 23%, but in that range, across the 8 counties, on average, 31% of housing units are vacant for seasonal, occasional, and recreational use. And
I would guess most of those are vacant in the wintertime. But probably not always.
That's kind of the pattern we saw. We did ask them, and again, for our partners, encouraged us to ask, when are you here and how often? And you can really just see that curve, that in the warmer months, that's when folks are mostly taking advantage of these second homes. They reported an average of 92 days visiting in their second home county per year. Kind of higher than we expected, but
that's higher than I would have thought.
And again, and that has a different kinds of impacts, but certainly one of them is spending. We asked, how much do you spend, on different types of items in a given year in your second home community, and they indicated again, this is a median number, which is the midpoint of the range of different dollar values, but the median spending number was $246 per year. And then you have, approximately 52,000 households potentially spending, a fair amount of money in their community. Lots of in terms of what they spend on gas and groceries, liquor, maintenance for their home. So obviously, they're having an economic impact. They're part of the economy in these counties that we tend to refer. There's the researchers who look at these types of counties. They call them recreation counties or high natural amenity counties, and you can see why. The beautiful lakes, the woods, all of this natural presence, and it's a draw to people. But part of the studies that have gone on around recreation counties have really looked at the higher population dynamics. A lot of these folks, and this is true of the group that we surveyed as well, they visit, they buy a second home, and after a while they want to make that a permanent home. We found that over 50% of the respondents to the survey plan or intend, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but they plan to retire to their second home and make it their permanent year-round home. Most of these folks indicate over the next 10 years. So we're potentially looking at kind of a surge in population. Older folks, obviously the baby boomers kind of probably play a role in that bump in the population. But a lot of folks intending to move to their second home community, and many of them over the next 10 years. So, that can be good and bad. There's a lot of research on that. There are positive and negative impacts. Some will say, well, this is creating lousy jobs. This kind of economy is often tied in with tourism, and it's creating low wage, no benefit, seasonal jobs. And yet, some of the other research suggests that these are the ways that young folks with maybe not such great skills and a little bit of education get a foot in the door and start a career in retail or in tourism, or so it's there's a lot of different thoughts about whether this is good or bad, and maybe it's mixed, right?
I know I've looked at studies where they were looking at, for example, Leech Lake used to have 75 resorts. I believe there are less than 25 resorts left on Leech Lake.
I think, and what you're describing is true. The Department of Revenue collects gross sales data from resorts, and then also counts the number of resorts, and has done that, and just the data that I've seen from 1985 to 2011. And boy, you can just, one line is going one way, the other line is going the other way. It's kind of surprising, even through the Great Recession, gross sales increased steadily. And those are dollars that are corrected for inflation. Those are real dollars increasing as the number of resorts, just as you've described, has gone down and down.
And I know that one of the arguments is sort of what you're alluding to here is that the resorts generate more revenue for the cities in which these communities are, whereas when they have their own cabins, they bring a lot of their own groceries from home. They may buy it at Walmart where they live in St. Cloud or whatever, so it has more of a negative impact. But I'm sure there are a lot of other factors than just those two to consider.
You bet, you bet. And the expansion of some of the larger resorts is another factor in there, I'm sure.
How many people come to these? You've done some research on how many people come up to the cabins.
Well, it's across a range. I mean, most of the respondents indicated that it was one or two folks who were, you know, if you say, what's the size of the group coming up to the cabin for the weekend, it's one or two folks. But if you look at the average, it's four. Across all those, you know, we asked them, you know, one or two, three or four, or five or six, and the average was four. So if you take that, and this is a very rough number and not meant to be definitive, if you take that and you say there's an average of four folks across 52,000 households across 8 counties, you know, you're up over 200,000 people.
Wow.
You know. Again, very average.
We can see that
this is like a big blurry picture. We're a couple of thousand feet off the planet and looking down in terms of data, but still, I mean, it's an indication of the presence of the importance of these part-time neighbors.
Sure, and I think we can all see that on 371 and all the highways coming north on the weekends.
Right,
there's a mass exit out of the Twin Cities and St. Cloud, and so we do see those impacts here. You bet.
You bet.
Growth. Do you see this as still a growth industry? You think that there's opportunities to keep growing, or have we sort of maxed out the cabin sales?
Well, you know, that's going to change. One of our research and evaluation specialists was pointing out to me that, you know, this is going to be a boom that 10 years out, you know, a lot of these folks in their 60s and 70s may not be around. So, you know, it's a kind of a boom and bust dynamic where maybe in Aiken County you'll see a lot of those, if there are empty second homes, they're going to fill up. And then in another 10, 15 years, there may be a lot of homes for sale, a lot of second homes for sale. And, you know, that creates kind of a problem, but then the market's going to drive the price down for those, and more folks who thought they couldn't afford a second home, you know, might be coming up and putting some money down.
And it might be even more reasonable, who knows, huh?
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, you get slack in the market, price tends to move down.
Yep. Since the 70s you've got here, the recreation, high natural amenity, and retirement counties in the United States have grown faster than other non-metro counties.
Right.
Could you talk just a little bit about that?
Right, and a lot of research has been done, as I mentioned earlier, about these recreation counties, but that is one of the markers, is that they, because of the amenities, we saw this in the respondents to the survey, they said, why did you even buy this property? Natural amenities. It's the lake. It's the trees, it's the trails.
They aren't buying them necessarily to make money off it, are they?
Most aren't. I mean, most of these folks, a fair number have been there, have owned these homes for 10 to 20 years or even over 20 years. So it's a fairly stable population. What you mentioned earlier, you've got families and generations that kind of connect with that visit on the lake and growing up with mom and dad and your grandparents, and you know, that's part of how you make sense out of life, is to be in that place. But I forgot your question there. But
well, I was just wondering if there was going to be a lot more growth in that particular area. But you know,
but I think it's based on that. You think about the baby boomers. I mean, that's a big bump in kind of population growth. And then as they move out into retirement, as they move out to the lake and make that second home their permanent home, their year-round home, I mean, that's going to have an impact. But what our specialist was pointing out is that you look out 10 to 15 years, you're going to see that start to decline, because those people, you know, they're going to move into town, maybe they're going to sell that house on the lake, and that's going to, like I say, I mean, it maybe creates a little bit of a problem in the real estate market for a little while, but as prices go down, you get new second homeowners coming in to buy them up and, you know, starting a new cycle.
It seems, and having lived here all my life and been on most of these lakes most of my life, the thing that I have seen is we've gone from what I would consider really seasonal cabins to mansions, really, where the average person is not going to be able to afford those. Where, you know, in the 70s and the early 80s, there were little cabins that you could sell and people could afford to buy them, at least more so than today.
You bet.
And so when this generation gets older with a lot of these McMansions that are sitting there. It'll be interesting to see what happens, because
could be some maintenance issues.
Yeah, there's going to be there's I would think a lot limited list of buyers for that kind of a place than before. But that's really interesting. You have some interesting studies too about the attachment to their communities.
Yes, this was again driven by local and county and regional partners wanted us to ask these questions. Generally, the second homeowner feels very attached. This is what we found in terms of asking these questions, very attached to their second home on the lake. Not so much attached, or not so strongly attached to their second home community. And it's a bit of a gap there. And they're very active people. We asked them a series of questions, is like, how active are you in your first home community, in your primary residence community? And the answer was very active. A high proportion of the respondents indicating that they're involved in community organizations, they run for political office, they volunteer, they donate. These are active folks. They're not so active, much lower levels of activity across those types of activities in their second home communities, but indicating a willingness to be more involved, to be more engaged. So that's an opportunity for these 8 counties and the communities within them to reach out and to tap some of this expertise. They got business expertise. They're volunteering in their primary home community. Maybe this is a real resource, in a sense, for our northern tier communities.
I'm amazed just in the Brainerd area the expertise that is on the lakes. I mean, I've had a lot of opportunities to interact with people. We've had Walt Disney illustrators that live on Gull Lake. Just an amazing amount of talent.
Right.
And usually, if you don't have some way of introducing yourself to those people, you never get exposed to the talent that is out there. But you can see that you said you've got people coming from the Middle East, even when you did
apparently in terms of ownership.
Right.
I mean, that just shows ownership.
It just shows that there's people getting very diverse.
It is. And this is, a highly educated and well-off population. They have a lot of experience. So I'm hoping that at least that underscores, the survey underscores that this is an opportunity to connect with these folks and get them more engaged in your community.
What is it that concerns these people when they look at the area? I know water quality, you said, is one very important
water quality. I mean, we asked a number of open-ended questions about values, about their perception of what was going on in their second home community. And when we asked, what's the single most important improvement that you would see, you want to see happen in your second home community over the next 20 years, more of a long-term vision kind of a question, water and environmental quality generally was the number one, far and away the number one response in terms of improvements needed. The second response, which might in some ways come right back and bump into that first response, is lower my taxes. The improvement I could see is you lower my property taxes. And of course, some of these folks are well off, some are on fixed income and want to stay within their means. In terms of the challenges that they see that are faced, and again with an open-ended question, same thing. The water quality is just seen as a potential issue. High property taxes, and then some tension. The group wants to see a better economy in their second home county or community. They want to see more jobs. They want to see more business happening, and yet they're concerned about overdevelopment. And that's always kind of for the humans, kind of a tension that goes on in our country anyway, between, you want the income and the taxes and the profits and the tax base that's generated by more development, and yet you want to have that quiet space on the lake and not feel like, oh my gosh, they're going to build 20 more homes across the street from me. And so there's a tension there, and maybe that's just pointing an arrow for some of these counties, especially, to think about their planning and development, planning policy and regulation of how they want to manage, this kind of potential growth with a lot of new people moving in and with these kind of values that they bring with them.
I know lake owner associations are very concerned about aquatic invasive species.
You bet. And
in the metro area, Minnetonka and some of those lakes are pretty overrun already by some of the aquatic invasive species. But it doesn't seem to have really diminished the value of the property much in that area. Okay. And I'm wondering if that's going to be as big of concern about property values as some people perceive it to be.
Right, and we didn't include that in our survey. We did not ask about that.
That just would be an interesting question, because I think if you're living on the lake and if you've got zebra mussels, you're not going to leave.
Right.
But you do have certain inconveniences that are going to be caused by that on your boat lift and your boat and that sort of thing. But I know it is a real big concern to almost all these lakes.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly heard a lot. We do tend to focus more on the economic side of things, not so much on water and water quality. I mean, it did come through as an issue. We asked people, you know, wide open, what's the most important thing to you? And that water and environmental quality piece came through very strongly. We did find one item that came up for the home associations, or the lake associations as well, lake districts, is that they're very important communicators for this audience, for this group. You know, we asked them, where do you typically get your news from when you're in your second home county, or you're, you know, on the internet and maybe looking north to the next weekend? And it tends to be through newspapers. It tends to be through these home associations or lake associations, and it tends to be through the internet with a preference. You know, we asked them also, where would you prefer to get your information from? And more of them want to see it through the internet, getting the email and learning through that.
If people want to find out more about this study, or they want to find out more about what you do, or if they would like to have a presentation, how do they get a hold of you?
So if you Google or use another search engine and just look for University of Minnesota Extension Community. We're based in the Center for Community Vitality. That's a statewide center, which includes community economics, leadership and civic engagement, and the Tourism Center, the U of M Tourism Center.
That's good stuff, Merritt. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
And keep up the good work.
Thanks.
You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.